This is where the Jersey Devil hides, past the boardwalk lights and deep in the Pine Barrens shadows. New Jersey is a graveyard of forgotten souls. Asylum halls, abandoned roads, and battle sites hold a terrifying truth. We count down 15 cursed places where the dead refuse to rest. Don't watch alone. 1. Devil's Tower, Alpine. The monolith known today as Devil's Tower, or Mateo Tipi Bear Lodge by the Lakota, is a geological anomaly. Its striated columns rise 267 feet, formed by a pressurized igneous intrusion, though indigenous accounts attribute the deep vertical scoring to the colossal claws of a demonic bear spirit. The dense alpine forest surrounding the base is often shrouded in a peculiar static mist that deadens sound. Early climbing reports, especially those from the 1890s concerning unauthorized ascents, are sparse and suspiciously end with notes describing unnatural friction or deep guttural sounds echoing from the summit cavity. This high-altitude area, specifically the boulder field on the south slope, is historically a place of ritual avoidance, where the earth is said to actively reject human presence. Documentary evidence confirms that the atmosphere shifts dramatically after sundown. Rangers and seismic researchers assigned to the high meadows report a persistent, low-frequency vibration, not attributable to wind or natural causes. In 1978, a geological survey team setting up equipment near the Durance route noted an electromagnetic spike that coincided precisely with the sound of immense, labored breathing coming from the rock face itself. Impossibly loud and non-directional, this auditory presence aligns perfectly with the Cheyenne warnings regarding Dax Pichia Salak, the home of the great bear spirit that eternally attempts to climb the columns in search of escape or prey. The team abandoned their sensitive gear after discovering massive, fresh gouges in the basalt columns 400 feet above the ground. Far beyond the reach of any modern climbing equipment, those few climbers who have spent the night illegally bivouacked on the tower's narrow ledges speak vaguely of being watched, not by animals, but by tall, ambulatory shadows moving across the sheer rock face, often disappearing into the polygonal gaps. When retrieved, they frequently exhibit extreme localized hypothermia and a distinct, deep scratch, always 3 parallel lines on the shoulder or back, consistent with a defensive strike from an impossible elevation. The overwhelming silence of the alpine environment is repeatedly broken by these isolated, documented incidents, serving as a brutal reminder that the formation is not merely inert rock. It is a pressurized, scarred entity waiting to expel those who trespass upon its living altar. Redmill Museum Village, Clinton. The Redmill Museum Village in Clinton, New Jersey, is a preserved industrial relic, but its history runs deeper than timber and gears. Rooted in the cold waters of the South Branch Raritan River, operating as early as 1762, the iconic structure, stained crimson by iron ore dust, stands as a locus for well-documented paranormal activity. Visitors and staff alike have cataloged unexplained temperature drops and the disembodied sound of bare feet shuffling across the upper floorboards when the building is locked. This sustained pattern of activity shifts the narrative from folklore into a documented case file, suggesting an energetic residual presence tethered to the property's centuries of grim labor and fatal accidents along the treacherous waterway. The primary spectral resident is commonly identified as William, a young boy believed to have drowned in the river near the mill race during the mid-19th century. His presence is most strongly reported in the blacksmith shop and the upper storage rooms of the main mill, often near areas that remain perpetually damp and cold. Investigators note the distinct auditory phenomena of a child's weeping that abruptly cuts off, followed by the chilling sensation of a small, cold hand lightly grazing the back of a neck. Objects often move on their own, a simple toy top, reportedly left as an offering by a previous visitor, frequently shifts position overnight, despite strict security protocols and lack of viable drafts, confirming an intelligent interaction. The Redmill is not merely haunted, it acts as a passive container for these tragic energies. The enduring horror is not the death itself, but the persistence of a child's isolated, cold fear. The historical record confirms multiple drownings over the mill's operative history, making William merely one of many spirits bound to the humid, echoing spaces. This established environmental pattern of loss confirms a localized, persistent haunting, a permanent echo of childhood terror, forever mingling with the sound of grinding machinery and the constant, indifferent rush of the Raritan River in the dark. Ringwood Manor. Ringwood Manor stands as a document of American industry, evolving from colonial ironworks supplying the Continental Army into a grand Victorian estate, occupied most famously by the Hewitt family dynasty. The historical weight of the structure, built atop centuries of mining operations in the Ramapo Mountains, appears conducive to localized energy phenomena. Documentation dating back to the late 19th century details recurring extreme cold spots and the sound of heavy, deliberate footsteps traversing the second-floor servants' quarters when the house was confirmed empty and locked. These events are not singular occurrences, but patterns noted by multiple, unrelated caretaking staffs over a 50-year period following the death of Abram Hewitt. The most frequently reported residual manifestation is the Gray Woman. This entity is consistently described as a translucent, elderly female figure, sometimes observed ascending the grand staircase, but more often reported near the formal gardens and the former servant housing, particularly at twilight. Investigative researchers tentatively attribute the visual phenomena to the lingering emotional imprint of Mrs. Sarah Hewitt, the last mistress of the estate, though definitive proof connecting her persona to the apparition remains elusive in the archives. Beyond the specter, physical displacement is common. Caretakers find large, heavy furniture repositioned overnight in the locked library and unused receiving parlors, despite entry points remaining secured. The sensation reported by long-term security personnel is not one of overt malice or sudden alarm, but of profound, constant observation, a pervasive surveillance emanating directly from the historical architecture. The official history of Ringwood Manor confirms its military and industrial significance, yet cannot explain the persistent, intelligent energy resisting classification within its walls. Emlin Physic Estate, Cape May. The Emlin Physic Estate, a meticulously preserved example of Victorian stick-style architecture in Cape May, was the lifelong residence of Dr. Emlin Physic. He shared the vast, unusual home with his mother, Mrs. Sarah Physic, and his aunt, Miss Emily, creating a rigidly domestic sphere maintained by the three unmarried adults until their respective deaths. The isolation of the household, coupled with the doctor's eccentric tendencies, provided a foundation for the spectral occurrences documented by the Cape May Historical Society decades after the family's occupancy ceased. Investigators note that the residual haunting is unusually specific, relating less to the doctor himself and more to the persistent sorrow of the women left behind. The most frequently registered phenomenon centers on the second-floor bedrooms and the main staircase. Witnesses consistently report localized, profound drops in temperature, often accompanied by the distinct scent of lavender, a fragrance historically utilized by Mrs. Physic. Audio phenomena are sparse, replaced by tactile sensations, including the reported brushing of unseen fabric against the legs of visitors near the dressing room. Crucially, The estate is famous for the residual presence of a domestic animal, Mrs. Physic's beloved black Newfoundland. Indian accounts describe the sensation of a cold, heavy pressure settling momentarily at the feet of researchers, followed by the faint sound of phantom paws pacing the wooden floors, searching. The conclusion drawn from extended vigils and archival accounts is that the dominant entity remains Mrs. Sarah Physic, eternally locked in a pattern of grief following the dog's death. Documentation confirms that during her life, she rarely left the property, and the specter now maintains that vigil. The manifestations are interpreted as a looping, non-interactive projection of profound loss. The house is not haunted by malice, but by the clinical persistence of a broken heart, a documented reality characterized by recurring cold spots, and the unnerving certainty that something heavy just walked past the door. Faith. Old Canal Inn, Nutley. The Old Canal Inn in Nutley sits mere yards from the long-vanished path of the Morris Canal, a waterway that brought both commerce and tragedy to the region in the 19th century. Built in 1835, the inn served as a vital, often overcrowded, stop for packet boats and mule skinners hauling coal and iron ore. Despite extensive renovations, the ground floor retains a stubborn, pervasive chill, particularly in the tap room, where the original stone foundation meets the excavated earth of the former canal basin. This residual dampness is the physical manifestation of a persistent, localized haunting documented since the canal's decline in the 1920s. The core legend concerns a lock tender, sometimes identified only as Silas, who allegedly fell into the icy canal during a late-night storm in 1878, either crushed by a shifting barge or drowned, attempting to manually operate the heavy lock gates. His body was recovered days later, downstream, but his spectral presence reportedly never left the inn where he sought nightly respite. Witnesses report hearing the rhythmic, heavy sound of dragging chains and wet rope being coiled outside the defunct back entrance, often accompanied by a sudden, intense drop in temperature. Surveillance footage has, on multiple occasions, captured inexplicable distortions resembling vertical bands of mist forming directly on the dry floor of the kitchen area adjacent to the old stable foundation. The most disturbing accounts come from staff closing the premises after midnight and guests staying in the smaller rooms upstairs. Guests report waking to the sensation of water filling the room, sometimes accompanied by the faint, distinctive smell of stagnant canal sludge and coal dust. The inn's management typically dismisses these reports as condensation or structural issues, yet the repeated testimony, often from unrelated parties staying in room 4, a room historically closest to Silas's old bunk, suggests a non-physical immersion event. The sound of running water when all taps are verified closed remains the inn's constant, terrifying reminder of the cold, muddy deaths delivered by the canal it once served. Burlington County Prison, Mount Holly. The Burlington County Prison, active from 1839 to 1965, stands as a chilling exemplar of the John Haviland architectural movement, designed specifically for psychological isolation. This wagon wheel structure enforced profound silence, preventing the 30 inmates housed there from ever communicating, effectively rendering the facility a laboratory of enforced loneliness. The heavy iron doors and thick stone walls were not only intended for physical confinement, but for the absolute cessation of human contact, an early form of sensory deprivation considered humane reform at the time. Yet, visitors today report that the silence is rarely absolute. The air is often charged with a palpable tension, suggesting that the forced isolation never truly lifted. Much of the residual activity centers on the stern command of former staff, most notably Warden George C., Miller, who ran the jail for decades before dying while still in office. Miller is believed by many researchers to be the source of the heavy, rhythmic footsteps consistently heard patrolling the second-floor catwalks, sounds that cease immediately upon direct inquiry. Furthermore, the persistent, metallic sounds of cell doors slamming shut without any physical cause are a routine occurrence throughout the original wing. These events suggest a rigid routine continues long after the facility was decommissioned. The energy often seems organizational, documenting the endless, cyclical days of strict institutional control. The deepest despair is concentrated in the lower level, where the original dungeon solitary confinement cells remain. These pitch-black chambers were used for the most severe discipline cases, sometimes holding inmates for weeks in total darkness and complete silence. Modern equipment frequently spikes within these confines, registering extreme, localized drops in temperature alongside frantic whispers captured on sensitive microphones. It is here, in the cold, windowless depths, that the cumulative sorrow of the isolation system seems most acute, a permanent echo of men begging for light or simply a single, audible human voice. 7. Absecon Lighthouse, Atlantic City. The Absecon Lighthouse. Standing since 1857 and designed by the eminent George Meade, remained the tallest structure in New Jersey, long after its light was officially extinguished in 1933. Historical records confirm the abrupt nature of its decommissioning. Yet the subsequent reports concerning the internal state of the tower present a persistent anomaly. Maintenance crews, tasked with preserving the structure decades after its abandonment, consistently documented the sound of heavy, ascending footsteps on the 228-step spiral staircase, often audible only when the tower was secured, empty and sealed against the sea air. The undisputed epicenter of the observed activity is invariably the Fresnel lens room. The temperature differential noted here is severe, often dropping 15 degrees below the surrounding ambient temperature. Irrespective of the season or external weather, photographic evidence gathered during detailed restoration efforts in the late 1990s occasionally captured faint, anachronistic distortions near the massive lens pedestal, interpreted by local preservationists as the residual energy of a former keeper. Witnesses describe not only these auditory and thermal events, but a distinct, pervasive scent of salt and antiquated lamp oil, long after all physical residue has been scrupulously cleaned from the masonry. However, the most invasive and unsettling phenomenon is physical contact. Personnel working alone near the first landing or within the lantern consistently report a palpable sensation, a cold, insistent hand pressing firmly onto the shoulder or the small of the back. This contact is always transient but intensely specific, mimicking a rigid inspection or a phantom warning from the tower's past administration. The structure remains a defiant monument to its age, but internally, the duty of illumination, it seems, was never truly relinquished by its original stewards. 8. Guggenheim Memorial Library, West Long Branch. The imposing structure now known as the Guggenheim Memorial Library served, for decades, as the palatial private residence of Murray and Leonie Guggenheim. Built in the Gilded Age style that defines Monmouth University's historic campus core, the building's transformation into a repository of knowledge did nothing to dispel the air of residual sorrow that clings to the upper floors. While students navigate the stacks on the lower levels, the preserved third floor, the site of the family's former private apartments and the magnificent ballroom, remains the epicenter of documented paranormal activity. Security personnel and university archivists have long been familiar with the specific phenomena attributed to the spirit of Leonie, who reportedly grieves for her lost status and the subsequent repurposing of her home. The activity is rarely visual, but overwhelmingly somatic and auditory. The temperature shift is the most immediate indicator, described by multiple reliable witnesses as a sudden, sharp drop that feels unnatural even in the deepest winter. This cold almost always precedes the distinctive sound of high-heeled shoes pacing deliberately across the polished wood floors of the former master suite, now sequestered administrative offices. Reports consistently place the sound near the ornate, closed doors that once led to Leonie's dressing rooms. Maintenance logs confirm that no building vibration or structural flaw accounts for the persistent, measured cadence heard late at night or during early morning hours. Perhaps the most unsettling documentation relates to the sound of soft, distinct weeping. This sound is isolated to the third-floor landing near the ballroom's entrance, a spot from which Leonie would have once surveyed her guests. Witnesses describe the sound as muffled, yet entirely present, mournful, quiet anguish that disappears the moment human attention is directly paid to its source. The library operates under the knowledge that its oldest resident is perpetually present, grieving the intrusion of academia and ensuring that her dominion, though transformed, is never truly empty. Ong's Hat, Burlington County. The legend of Ong's Hat is often dismissed as a contemporary digital myth, yet its roots plunge deep into the isolation of the New Jersey Pine Barrens. The settlement, now nothing more than abandoned foundations and overgrown roads, allegedly takes its name from a forgotten incident, the burning of a man named Ong, whose hat was the only thing recovered, marking the spot of his demise. But the truly unsettling narrative began in the late 20th century, far removed from simple folklore, when reports surfaced concerning the Quantum Leap Institute, a clandestine research facility operating within the most remote, heavily wooded tracts of Burlington County. This group was said to be exploring inverted cosmology, using specialized, archaic equipment to manipulate reality and open doorways to parallel dimensions. The story, disseminated largely through early internet forums and obscure pamphlets, details a catastrophic experiment, the complete loss of the original researchers into these unstable rifts. Now, those who venture too far past the last paved road report not conventional spectral activity, but oppressive silence punctuated by high-frequency sounds that seem to originate from everywhere else. They claim the air doesn't just feel cold, it feels mathematically wrong. A profound temporal distortion near the overgrown cranberry bogs, a subtle, constant reminder of things that were moved and never returned. Metlar-Bodine House, Piscataway. The Metlar-Bodine House, an unassuming structure built on historic farmland in Piscataway, presents a classic example of residual haunting amplified by psychological overlay. Investigative reports consistently cite the 18th century structure as a locus of verifiable paranormal activity, specifically focused on the third floor and the kitchen wing. Researchers have documented rapid, inexplicable temperature drops exceeding 15 degrees Fahrenheit in controlled environments, most notably near the historic rocking chair in the upper parlor. These thermal anomalies are frequently preceded by the distinct sound of slow, heavy footsteps ascending the narrow rear staircase, a pattern consistently attributed to George Metlar, a long-deceased resident who retained ownership until the early 20th century. The consistent nature of these auditory and thermal shifts establishes the site as highly active. Beyond the kinetic events, multiple witnesses, including historical society docents and specialized paranormal teams, report visual and emotional encounters. A distinct, protective presence is often sensed in the children's room. This spectral manifestation is widely believed to be a young girl, sometimes observed as a fleeting shadow or a momentary distortion in peripheral vision. The emotional resonance associated with her presence is invariably described as profound sadness or loneliness, suggesting an unresolved attachment to the property. Object movement is concentrated in the dining area, where kitchen implements have been observed levitating or rearranging themselves mid-observation. Attempts to logically explain these displacements via vibration or structural shifting have failed, forcing categorization as genuine psychokinetic incidents. The distress felt by the presumed entities appears directly correlated with the intensity of the physical manifestations. The longevity of the Metlar family's occupancy, stretching across 2 centuries, provides the crucial context for the complex nature of the haunting. It is not one spirit, but a collection of deeply ingrained energies locked within the physical framework of the house. The current interpretation suggests that the activity functions as a time loop of emotional and environmental impressions, repeatedly playing out moments of domestic sorrow and territorial assertion. The house refuses to be merely a historical landmark. It remains an active, hostile archive, consistently demonstrating that its former inhabitants have integrated themselves into the very fabric of the old foundation, continuing their residence long after their documented deaths. Seven Stars Tavern, Piles Grove Township. The Seven Stars Tavern, established in the mid-18th century near Woodstown, served historically as a vital stagecoach inn and a political hub for Piles Grove Township. Its architecture, specifically the narrow, steep main staircase leading to the upper rooms, is a constant fixture in paranormal reports dating back over 70 years. Contemporary witnesses, including former owners and preservationists, consistently recount instances of inexplicable cold spots concentrated near the top landing, and the distinct sound of a woman weeping or a sharp, heavy thump echoing from the second floor. These documented events are often preceded by the immediate failure of electrical equipment, a common poltergeist signature according to modern investigations aimed at historical documentation. Local historical accounts and folk tales point to the tragic death of an unnamed woman, sometimes identified as Sarah, who occupied a room upstairs in the early 1800s, while some accounts claim she was poisoned by a jealous lover. The most persistent legend suggests she suffered a fatal fall down the winding steps. A fall many believe was deliberate foul play disguised as accident. This narrative is reinforced by the sensory evidence gathered during recent maintenance work. Several contractors refused to work alone after reporting being physically nudged or shoved while ascending the stairs, perceiving an aggressive, protective presence that guards the upper hall against intruders. The entity believed to be Sarah remains inextricably bound to the structure. Recent preservation efforts aimed at stabilizing the centuries-old framework have amplified activity, suggesting disturbance only reinforces the bond. The sound of dragging furniture when the rooms are known to be empty, objects moved across locked floors, and the chilling scent of rosewater in the dead of winter are markers frequently recorded in logs kept by the Historical Society. The Seven Stars Tavern is not merely haunted, it acts as a permanent, active anchor for a violent history that refuses to be relegated to the past, continuously manifesting its sorrow on the very steps that ended her life. Union County Courthouse, Elizabeth. The Union County Courthouse in Elizabeth, New Jersey, is a nexus of modern jurisprudence and spectral continuity. The current building stands on ground consecrated by centuries of legal finality, a site where the weight of judgment transcends mere bricks and mortar. Those who work late in the records archives or patrol the deserted upper corridors describe an oppressive stillness, the air itself feeling heavy, pregnant with unresolved injustice. It is not the sounds of the living that disturb the quiet, but the distinct, rhythmic creak of floorboards in empty chambers and the sudden, precipitous drop in temperature near the former jury deliberation rooms. The most persistent phenomenon centers on the phantom known colloquially among staff as the hanging judge. This entity is believed to be the residue of a particularly severe jurist from the late 19th or early 20th century, a man notorious for his swift sentencing and unforgiving demeanor. Witnesses, bailiffs, and clerical staff report seeing a tall, imposing shadow figure dressed in archaic formal wear, often glimpsed standing motionless at the back of courtroom 4, observing proceedings that ceased hours ago. His presence is accompanied by a profound, paralyzing sense of accusation, driving employees from the area when the building empties. These apparitions are not isolated psychological incidents, but documented occupational hazards. Maintenance logs frequently cite inexplicable, malfunctioning security cameras that refuse to operate when pointed towards the third-floor administrative offices after dusk. Lawyers recounting experiences detail files inexplicably shifting on desks overnight, or the sound of muffled, desperate sobbing echoing from the sealed basement holding cells, spaces long decommissioned. The courthouse does not merely house the living, it maintains a chilling, permanent docket of the condemned, ensuring that legal history remains irrevocably present. The Union Hotel, also Flemington. The Union Hotel in Flemington, New Jersey, is a 19th century fixture inescapably burdened by history. Its architecture anchors a century of high-stakes human despair, cemented in 1935 when it served as the media command center for the infamous Hauptmann trial. That concentration of intense human emotion, tragedy, and desperation permanently stained the building's atmosphere. But the spectral residents predate the media circus, suggesting multiple layers of foundational trauma layered beneath the notoriety. The most consistent entity haunts the second floor. A woman in high Victorian dress, often referred to by staff as Martha, accounts detail her pale, static reflection staring down from the upstairs windows onto Main Street. Her manifestations are typically defined by sensory intrusion rather than visual horror, a sudden, deep drop in ambient temperature, immediately followed by the distinct, heavy smell of outdated perfume or lilacs blooming out of season within the hallways. Maintenance logs and documented police reports confirm inexplicable power fluctuations localized specifically to the second floor, often concurrent with the sound of soft, interminable weeping near room 210, which guests have repeatedly refused to re-enter. These accounts are consistent across decades, delivered by initially skeptical hotel employees, whose testimonies align perfectly regarding the sensory data. The Union Hotel remains a holding cell for the emotional residue of the past, confirming that some historical tenants checked in, but never truly processed their checkout. Dey Mansion, Wayne. The Dey Mansion, a Georgian manor constructed near the Passaic River around 1770, remains historically critical for its function as General George Washington's headquarters. During two distinct periods in 1780, a month in July, and then again from October to November, the elegant structure became the nerve center of the Continental Army's defense. This history, meticulously preserved, carries a profound, chilling weight. Historians focus on the strategic planning with Lafayette and Hamilton, but the house also served as an infirmary. The upper rooms and main halls, designed for diplomacy, frequently held sick and dying soldiers, their suffering a quiet counterpoint to the high-level council meetings below. The very foundation of the home is soaked in the mundane misery of revolutionary service. Contemporary reports from staff and historical interpreters consistently document phenomena that resist natural explanation. The grand central staircase is the epicenter of activity, where heavy, deliberate footsteps are often heard descending when the building is confirmed empty, echoing the passage of officers or perhaps the shuffling of men being carried to their beds. Cold spots, localized and severe, manifest without regard for exterior temperature. particularly in the rooms Washington used as his private chambers. Most disturbing is the ubiquitous scent of period tobacco smoke, thick and acrid, often detected in closed rooms or hallways that have been cleared of visitors for hours. The prevailing theory among researchers is one of residual trauma. The Dey Mansion is not haunted by a single identifiable specter, but by the relentless, historical energy of hardship. It is an archive of suffering, the anxiety of command, the feverish breath of the ill, and the silent, grinding fear of an 18th century conflict. The house remembers, and the sounds of 1780 are not echoes, but continuous, quiet recordings of men who never truly left their post. Steuben House, Bergen County. The Steuben House, originally the Zabriskie patent, exists as a crucial artifact of Bergen County's brutal Revolutionary War landscape. Its strategic position near the Hackensack River made it a tactical necessity, leading to repeated occupation by conflicting forces. Archival records confirm the building housed British, Continental, and Hessian units, functioning frequently as an impromptu field hospital or temporary holding barracks. The documented trauma associated with this period is physically palpable in the structure, evidenced not by bloodstains, which are long since scoured, but by the overwhelming thermodynamic depression reported consistently within the original stone cellar and the upper landing. This historical saturation of violence forms the basis of the modern residual haunting. Witness accounts converge on auditory phenomena that defy natural explanation. Investigators frequently record faint, rhythmic metallic scraping sounds emanating from the second floor, reminiscent of bayonet maintenance, often coinciding with temperature drops, localized to the northeast corner room. A suspected sickbay. During the 1778 occupation, the most disturbing recurring manifestation involves an apparition identified by historical researchers as a Hessian grenadier. This entity is rarely fully visual. Rather, it presents as an extreme, localized cold spot accompanied by a low, guttural moaning sound, documented exclusively after 1:00 a.m. This is hypothesized to be a soldier left behind after a hasty retreat or execution. The house does not host a traditional poltergeist, but rather a profound, looping echo of suffering. The psychological impact on caretakers is significant, citing an intense feeling of surveillance and pressure near the main staircase, which contemporary maps confirm was the primary route for transporting the injured or deceased. The Steuben House serves as a fixed point where the past is not merely remembered, but actively recurs, trapped in the timber and mortar of its 18th century construction, an architectural record of unbearable, unresolved military anguish perpetually playing out in River Edge. 15 locations, countless restless spirits. New Jersey certainly holds its secrets. Now, the real question is, which haunted spot are you brave enough to visit? Let us know in the comments below. If you enjoyed these chills, hit the like button and make sure you're subscribed, because next time we trade the Garden State for the high seas. Don't miss our terrifying dive into the world's most famous phantom ships. See you soon. If you dare,